Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Very Cold Lasagna Podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Lasagna. This is episode number 259 of this icy yet spicy sports podcast for all your filthy casual takes all in the world of sports for you filthy casual fans out there like you and me. And in this episode, we're here to continue along our 2024 NFL Season Team Recap Month. And we're down to the nitty-gritty of it, ladies and gents. We're down to the final 8 teams of said Season Team Recap Month. So in this part number 5, we're here to talk about the divisional playoff losers. The teams that made it to the conference quarterfinals, or I don't know, is it quarterfinals, semifinals? You let me know. But either way, we're here to talk about the divisional round losers that couldn't make it to the conference championship games and are left wondering, how can we make it there next season? So we have some things to talk about in this episode with our 2024 NFL Season Team Recap Month, part number 5. But a little bit of housekeeping before we get started, and apologize if there's some background noise, if it's like a lawnmower or a blower, a trimmer, someone's doing some yard work outside in another backyard. So if you hear something like that, apologize for the noise, but yeah, hopefully it's not picking up. But if it is, I do apologize. But anyway, with all that being said, make sure to listen to the Very Cold Lasagna Podcast wherever you get your podcast, whether it's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever it's available for all my audio listeners out there. And follow the show on social media, whether it's on Twitter or Instagram at Very Cold Lasagna. And for all the people watching on YouTube, make sure to smash the subscribe button if you're not already, which you should, by the way. And smash the like button as well. Leave a comment down below with all your filthy casual takes on the topic at hand. That being our season team recap, part number 5, the teams that we'll be discussing in this episode as we continue along with our season team recap month and what they need to do to improve for next season and how you felt how they did this past season and all that good juicy stuff that we'll be talking about here in this episode. And as always, share this with your friends, share this with your neighbor, share this with the whoever you're passing by, and share this with your colleagues, whether it's at work or school. Share the good, the bad, the ugly about this podcast entitled Very Cold Lasagna. Before we get started, though, with the actual topic at hand, there's a little bit of small update from the last 2 episodes. Actually, the last 3 episodes from one of the teams that we talked about. It was the Cincinnati Bengals, and they had a little out of date breaking news. And it was regarding the contract extensions for both of their receivers, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. If you remember T. Higgins, he was franchise tagged, and I was questioning whether the Bengals were going to actually, give him a long-term extension and whether T. Higgins was going to play under said franchise tag. Well, that no longer appears to be the case because T. Higgins got a long-term deal done, and so did Jamar Chase. They both get big, fat, lucrative deals done. And now they both get to stay in Cincinnati, play long-term. Joe Burrow, he gets both of his top receivers around and for the long-term future. I mean, it's a good thing for the offense. It's a good thing for the offense. Keep the chemistry together, keep the core together around for the long-term future. My only thing is for the Bengals, I hope they still have money. I hope they still have money to spend on the defense because, yeah, they're going to be able to score. Don't get me wrong on that. I mean, just granted that they have an offensive line, though. They have to spend on that, too. But where is going to be that defense? They better spend on that in the draft. I'm just saying. So that's a little update on what's been going on from the last 3 episodes when it comes to one of the teams and their updates. Yeah, T. Higgins and Jamar Chase of the Bengals is staying in Cincinnati. So that being said, let's get to our actual team recaps in this episode in part 5 of said team recaps, and that is the divisional playoff losers. So these teams, they had high expectations going into the year, and well, they act like with the other teams that we talked about in the last episode, they made it to the playoff dance. and they made it past the wild card round. And they actually had a pretty good chance to make it to their respective conference championship games, but they fell a tad bit short, and expectations were unfortunately not met. So, to cut it to the point, yeah, it was a season of either disappointment or falling short. So that being said, let's get right into these 4 teams that we're going to be talking about of, expectations, falling short, or meeting disappointment in part 5 of our 2024 NFL season team recap month. We begin part 5 of our 2024 NFL season team recap month with a familiar team that is on this list of our team recaps, and that team resides in H-Town, and that is the Houston Texans. 2023 saw H-Town's best season since 2019, so about 5 years or so, and it was a surprising one to boot, with the then rookie quarterback duo, head coaching duo of CJ Stroud and the coach DeMeco Ryans. They exceeded expectations of what was supposed to be a rebuild year for the Texans. So CJ Stroud and DeMeco Ryans in their respective roles led the Texans to a 10-win season, a first since forever. And not only that, a 10-win season, but the AFC South Division title. And not only that, a playoff win. So they became the first rookie head coach and quarterback duo to do so in NFL history. So they made it as far as the divisional playoffs against the Baltimore Ravens. While they got their butts whooped against the Ravens, the arrow was finally pointing up, like the tribal chief, for the Texans. And they were looking to build upon that success next season. Well, in this case, this past season for the Houston Texans. So when you look at this point in time for the Texans, as they're trying to make a deeper run and finally make it to their first ever AFC Championship game, because I believe they're the only team that hasn't made a conference championship game. But regardless, when you look at the Texans at this point in time, last offseason, they made a bunch of moves. They made a bunch of moves that were hopeful to help them in their quest to finally make an AFC Championship game. Some of those key moves included trade for running back Joe Mixon from the Cincinnati Bengals, as well as the big marquee move to go and get CJ Stroud some help in the passing game in trading for receiver Stephon Diggs from the Bills. So Diggs was coming over, who was disgruntled as all heck with this role with Buffalo. And now he comes over from Buffalo to Houston to be one of the focal points of that Texans offense. When you have weapons like Diggs, Nico Collins, and Tank Dell, well, now you got a variety of options for CJ Stroud. They also signed over key defensive players like Azeez Al-Shaair and Danielle Hunter to help out a defense that was kind of struggling in 2023, but they were all right. And they also drafted corner Kamari Lassiter from Georgia to help out the secondary. So overall, when you look at the Texans heading into this past season, they look to have improved going into 2024. And they had a very good chance to go into 2024, not only repeating as AFC South champions, but also hopefully go and get their very first AFC Championship game, given that CJ Stroud continues to improve in his year 2. So when you look at the positives for the Texans in 2024, they had some very strong season performances from their acquisitions, mainly from Joe Mixon. As when you start with Joe Mixon, the trade for him was very well worth it. He gave the offense not just some help in the backfield, after for whatever reason they stopped using Dameon Pierce, who was actually pretty effective in his rookie year. Yeah, he dropped off in year 2, but still a solid running back to have. But he also brought, going back to Joe Mixon, he also brought balance in the passing game, because it was evident during the time that he missed a couple of games to injury. His absence proved vital because the rushing attack couldn't get going. He put pressure on CJ Stroud to do more. We'll talk about CJ Stroud in a bit because, there's definitely a lot to talk about. Meanwhile, you have third-year corner Derek Stingley Jr. He took a major leap. He played all 17 games as a starter, and he became a major shutdown corner, including 5 interceptions, several pass deflections. And whenever he went man to man against opposing receivers, like they couldn't get past him. And then, you have your other teammate, Kamari Lassiter, who they drafted. He was solid late in the year. Sure, he endured some rookie pains, which is expected. But yeah, he was pretty good. He's pretty solid. Although they didn't have much else help in the secondary. And that transitions over to what went wrong for the Texans this past season. Yeah, the secondary wasn't that great. And what also wasn't great was the regression on offense. And that included CJ Stroud. While we get into one of the factors on why this happened in a bit, the offense didn't quite capture the same magic it had the year prior. A good amount of that had to do with the very poor offensive line, where there wasn't enough consistency at every position other than left tackle Laramie Tunzel. This resulted in CJ Stroud getting heavy pressure, sacked very quickly, et cetera, as well as making very poor throws under pressure. And that resulted in Stroud throwing a lot of interceptions. However, for as much as the offensive line is to blame for Stroud's struggles, Stroud himself is not blameless because he either underthrew a lot of his throws, overthrew a lot of his throws, and again, going back to the interceptions. So in essence, CJ Stroud had the sophomore slump, as a lot of people like to say. So for the Texans, they started out 5-1, but then as the season progressed, Stroud was completing either half or less of his less than half of his passes. So it didn't help though that his supporting cast was either underperforming or dwindling. But again, CJ Stroud didn't do much to elevate himself. And then that goes back to the one of the points that I mentioned. And now I'm gonna explicitly tell you the injuries, injury mania, running wild in H-Town, brother. The whole team regressed, especially on offense. But that was primarily not just because of the regression by CJ Stroud, but because of the injury bug that was plaguing this team. Look at the list of injuries. Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell. They suffered significant injuries, other than Nico Collins, because he missed over a month with a hamstring injury. But Diggs tearing his ACL before the halfway point of the season, and then Dell suffered an even more brutal injury with the brutal dislocated knee, and then also additional ligament tears, like before Christmas. Yeah, not exactly a great Christmas gift to have. And then you also lose key pieces on defense like Jalen Peter and Jimmy Ward in the secondary. And then you lose other key starters like Joe Mixon and Will Anderson. They missed time. Azeez Al-Shaair being suspended 3 games in December for being stupid, for hitting Trevor Lawrence late. So yeah, injury mania running wild was a major contributing factor for the Texans' regression that they just really couldn't overcome, along with the poor showing on both sides of the ball. So despite this though, the Texans still managed to win the AFC South again because the rest of the division sucked. When you look at the Jaguars with their own injuries and Trevor Lawrence being knocked out for the rest of the season by Al-Shaair. And then you look at the Colts, they just beat themselves up. And then the Titans, they had their own issues. So they finished the season with the same record that they had the previous year at 10-7. But again, it was pretty much the same song and dance in the playoffs. They win their first round game, and then they lose to the divisional. Although, despite this piss poor performance against the Chiefs, they had a somewhat decent chance to upset them because of the Chiefs and their own problems starting off fast, and the lack thereof. So when you look at this season for the Texans, their middling season left them with a lot of thinking to do, as this offseason is still ongoing. However, when you look at the very little resources to do it with, they now have to look to try again to hopefully and finally capture their first ever AFC title game berth. So when you look at their offseason so far for the Houston Texans, when they started the offseason, they didn't have a lot of cap room. They didn't have a lot of cap room to start. They they had around $4 million, which is like barely in the green. And their first round pick is 25th, which is like pretty late in the draft. And I believe when I last checked, they still had a decent amount of picks in day 2 and 3. So, I mean, it's something, unless they want to trade down or trade out of the first round. Some of their key free agents, not a whole lot, which is at least a good thing. But some of the key free agents included Stephon Diggs and Robert Woods. Robert Woods, I believe we went to another team already in the Saints. And Stephon Diggs, still out there, but I imagine the Texans are not bringing him back because of the injury concerns. And then linebacker Devin White, I believe he also went to another team already. But yeah, the Texans, their offseason is kind of questionable already because they gave up half of their offensive line away to other teams like Laramie Tunsil to the Commanders for multiple picks this year and next. Kenyon Green to the Eagles for C.J. Gardner-Johnson. So that's pretty questionable. That is pretty questionable. But the trades don't stop there because at least they got a receiver to counteract Tank Dell being out for likely what's going to be this whole next season. So they got Christian Kirk from the Jaguars. They also traded for guard Ed Ingram from the Vikings. But when it comes to actual free agency, not much. So when you look at what the Texans need to do for the rest of this offseason, well, they got to keep addressing the offensive line because the O-line really struggled to protect Stroud, especially in the interior. And they had too many moving parts, whether it was injury or underperforming. And yeah, it's just they really have to take committing the offensive line seriously. When you have trading away Tunsil and Green as your big primary moves, that's not a good thing. Sure, they addressed it by adding Lincoln Tomlinson and Ingram, but Tomlinson, some of you are familiar with him as a Niners fan, but he underperformed during his time as a Niner. And Ed Ingram comes in. No, it's not Ed Ingram. Lincoln Tomlinson is going to come in to challenge Blake Fisher for the left tackle spot. So the Texans still need to address the rest of the interior line because depth is looking really suspect right now. And then staying in the trenches, they got to go defensive tackle in the draft because they're okay getting to the quarterback. But stopping the run was a major issue for Houston, especially inside. So Nick Caserio and D'Amico Ryans should either use their 25th pick or maybe one of their first second round picks to address the defensive tackle position. So they got some decisions to make there. And then last but not least, they need to address their secondary. So you got to add depth at linebacker and whatever position at secondary in the draft because you got a decent foundation in the defense with Derek Stingley Jr., Kamari Lassiter, Jimmy Ward, Al Shire, but there's not much else behind them. So they got to find some gems in the later rounds of the draft because Houston so far, they haven't added much. So overall, when you look at this Texans team, they took a step back from their surprising 2023. But they still got a nice chance to rebound this fall because, well, not only the AFC South sucks, but if CJ Stroud works his way back up and they keep adding major pieces around him, then I think the Texans will rebound this coming fall. But that starts with building a better offensive line for CJ and some better depth at defense. So now we return to the City of Angels and talk about the blue and gold side of LA this time, as we now discuss the Los Angeles Rams. This Rams squad that had a mix of vets and emerging young talent rebounded from a disappointing Super Bowl title defense to return to the playoffs in 2023. And although they went one and done against Matthew Stafford's old squad in the Lions, there's optimism. There's optimism in that side of LA that they could reclaim the NFC West in 2024. And who knows, maybe they can go beyond that this past season. So when you look at this point in time for the LA Rams last offseason, they made a couple of moves. So they had to first address what they were going to do at defensive coordinator because Raheem Morris, their previous D coordinator, he decided to go southeast and take the Falcons head coaching job. And to replace him, in comes Chris Shula as the new coordinator. Chris Shula had previous positions below Raheem Morris, and now he steps in at the internal promotion. They also had to address what they were going to do to replace Aaron Donald because when free agency started, Aaron Donald, their top defensive tackle and a damn good defensive tackle, by the way, he announced his retirement at the beginning of free agency. So they had to go address, well, how are they going to replace their biggest key defensive lineman in free agency and, well, the offseason overall for the Rams. Well, that's what the Rams exactly did. They did it through the draft by drafting Florida State defensive lineman Jared Verse and Braden Fisk, amongst some other nice key defensive additions. So right out of the gate, they already addressed their biggest need in replacing Aaron Donald with some nice pieces with Jared Verse and Braden Fisk. They also re-signed in the offseason Kevin Dotson while signing former Lions guard Jonah Jackson to solidify that offensive line for Matthew Stafford. So in essence, the Rams were already injected with a mix of youth and vets. And now when you look at the Rams going into this past season, they're well poised to make a crack back at the top of the NFC West, challenge the 49ers after a successful offseason. Unfortunately, it didn't start off that way for the Rams. Actually, it started off in a familiar way and how their previous season was. They started off pretty poor at the 1-4 start, and that was mainly because of injuries. A lot of injuries to their key players, and that contributed to their poor performances. When you look at guys like Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, their top receivers, they got hurt in their first 2 games, and they missed about a month. So Matthew Stafford had to settle for reserve receivers, being in the starting lineup. The offensive line underwent a lot of shuffling because most of the starters got hurt early, or in the case of Alaric Jackson, he was suspended for the first 2 games. So yeah, the offensive line, they were missing both of their guards. Alaric Jackson at left tackle was missing for the first 2 games. So yeah, Stafford was getting hit a lot out there. But the defense also suffered too, because they were missing Troy Reader, Darius Williams going missing with injuries. So other than a blowout loss in Arizona in week 2, the Rams, they were still fighting. They were still fighting for their lives out there despite all the injuries, but they just didn't have enough proper support to close out games other than upsetting the Niners in week 3. But when you look at once they did get healthy later in the season, then you started to see them come together, even with some consistency issues with Stafford in the passing game. But we'll talk about that in a bit. So one of the positive things for the Rams this past season was a young defense. You saw me talk about Braden Fisk and Jared Verse. Great pass rushing duo. They had instant production right out of the gate. And I mean, sure, people will miss Aaron Donald, but this new rookie duo in the defensive line, they pretty much were like instant replacements for him. They both combined for 16 and a half sacks in the regular season, and they pretty much were a contributing force in a playoff game against the Vikings, a 14-win Vikings team, mind you, that the Rams combined for 9 sacks. So yeah, they have the Rams front office. Yeah, they pretty much put their eggs in the development basket for this Rams front 4, and it paid off. It absolutely paid off. So yeah, there were some issues covering receivers this past season though, but despite that, they still got a promising young defense with corners Darius Williams and Kobe Durant, and then you got free and safety addition Cameron Curl. They were good in the secondary rotation. And then you look at that late season stretch for the Rams. Like I said, they slowly got healthier after the bye week. And while there were some issues with Matthew Stafford in the passing game when it came to being consistent, finishing drives, the Rams still won an important stretch of games in December to win the NFC West by a bare margin, though, from the Seahawks. And that bare margin was a strength of victory tiebreaker. Yeah. What a way to win the division there, pal. But nonetheless, they still won it on a tiebreaker. And by the time they played each other in week 18, I mean, it didn't really matter because the Rams were already resting their starters. So nobody had anything to play for. Hell, they didn't have anything to play for when you had Jimmy G out there starting for the Rams. But yeah, there were still some concerns though on how the offense was going to do because again, they're resting their starters, and again, the offense's inability to finish drives. But nonetheless, they still won the division. They rebounded from 2 years ago and followed up a playoff appearance from the previous year with winning the division. So the Rams have themselves a nice season of adversity that they overcame to win the division, and they were in the playoffs. And even if they were ridden off by many, before their playoff game, they're still gonna take it. They're still gonna take it up like a man. They defied big odds to destroy the Vikings in their wild card game that was in Arizona because of the wildfires, and they persevered until the end against the Eagles team. That then they were in the elements and despite Saquon Barkley's long ass touchdown late in the game, but yeah, they were in it until the very end. They actually had a chance to win that game against the Eagles. It's just unfortunate that the offensive line broke down for them, and they made a few mistakes on their last two chances that ended their upset hopes in the snowy Philadelphia weather. But regardless of how things ended for the Rams, they produced a strong finish, and they should kind of be proud of that. Sean McVay and Les Snead, they put together a strong foundation in place to keep the NFC West in their firmly grasp for next fall. But to do that, though, they had and still have some work to do. But when they started off this offseason for the blue and gold, it was actually some pretty good resources. They had around $54 million in cap space. The first round draft pick is 26, so pretty late in the draft, but they'll find something that they want. Some of the key free agents included Demarcus Robinson, who is with the 49ers now. Defensive tackle Bobby Brown III. Kind of a big loss, though, because he's on the Panthers now, so they have to find a replacement for him. Linebackers Troy Reeder and Christian Roseboom. Roseboom is on another team, I believe. And corner Akella Witherspoon. Not sure where he is at now, but probably the two key losses is Bobby Brown III and Roseboom, so they have to find replacements for them. Some of the moves that they already made in the current offseason is trading guard Jonah Jackson to the Bears for this year's 6th round pick. So it's kind of a loss, but at the same time, not really, because Jackson has had an injury history. But they also made a very important decision at the quarterback spot, and that was what they were going to do with Matthew Stafford. Because remember, there were murmurs that they were exploring options of trading Matthew Stafford, and they let him explore those options. But Matthew Stafford ultimately decided to stay on a restructured deal in LA, which honestly is smart for both sides. So Matthew Stafford is back in LA for another season, and so is his backup, Jimmy Garoppolo, to a new 1-year deal. And then at the receiver spot, there was also another big decision on Cooper Kupp. What were they going to do with him? Because, again, his play really declined this past year. And, yeah, there's decisions that had to be made on whether they're going to trade him or release him. And, well, we found out soon enough, because they signed receiver Devontae Adams, who was released by the Jets, to a new 2-year deal. And then soon after Cooper Kupp was gone, who soon after signed with the division rival Seahawks. Other moves that were made included re-signing left tackle Alaric Jackson to a new big fat deal. And then coming over from the powder and blue side of Los Angeles, he is now a blue and gold man. Poona Ford, the defensive tackle, to probably replace Bobby Brown. And yeah, Poona Ford comes over from the Chargers to a 3-year deal. So when you look at the things that the Rams still need to address this offseason, they still have to add some help at middle linebacker, because there are still some issues for LA in the passing defense, and one of those issues was covering the middle of the field. They still need another running mate next to Omar Spates, with Christian Roseboom now in Carolina. So maybe they do that in the draft in the first round, or maybe in day 2 of the draft. They also have to address the cornerback spot in this upcoming draft as well, because they've yet to add anyone to help Kobe Durant and Darius Williams. But maybe this is where, that first round pick comes into play. They also have to add more help at receiver because they re-signed Tutu Atwell and Devontae Adams to replace Cooper Kupp, but they still could use another threat in the receiving game to have some assistance for Puka Nacua and Devontae. So the Rams were a resilient bunch in 2024, and going into this upcoming season in September, I still expect that to be the case. So they still need to add more pieces to a middling offense and a middling passing defense. But if they fix that, their grip on the NFC West may be even firmer than we imagined. Wrapping up our time in Los Angeles, now we go over to the flock, the Ravens flock, as we now go over to the Baltimore Ravens. Falling just short in the AFC Championship game in 2023, the Ravens were going into this past season looking to head back to said AFC Championship game, and this time not only win it, but also make another Super Bowl. So to do that, let's look at where we were at this point in time with Baltimore last offseason. So when we look at the Ravens last offseason, they made a couple of big moves. One of those big moves included signing running back Derrick Henry to a 2-year deal to help out the running game, because the running game was pretty non-existent for Baltimore in 2023, because it's basically Lamar Jackson being both the passer and the runner. In the draft, they also drafted corner Nate Wiggins from Clemson to help out the secondary, but they also had to make another decision on a certain position, and not on the field, like it comes to a player, but when it comes to a coach, because they had to make a change at defensive coordinator, because gone was Mike McDonald. Mike McDonald was gone, who led that top-ranked defense. So he was gone because he took on the Seahawks head coaching job. So they promoted from within to give that coaching job to linebackers coach Zach Orr. So he moves over to be the new defensive coordinator. But other than that, the Ravens were limited on spending money, and that caused them to get purged hard in free agency. They lost many key starters on the offensive line and on the defense, like linebacker Patrick Queen and safety Geno Stone. So they attempted to replace them through the draft with some mixed results. Regardless of, getting purged hard and making a couple of big decisions, the Ravens looked to get to the Super Bowl, even if their deficiencies were going to make things difficult for them. So when you look at the positives for this Ravens team this past season in 2024, obviously you start with the Derrick Henry signing, which finally brought balance to the offense. Deemed as an afterthought when he was deemed a free agent after his last season with the Titans in 2023, Henry rebounded from a down 2023 with a near 2,000-yard, 16-touchdown season. But more importantly, though, his impact in the running game, well, it greatly impacted the offense, because he and Lamar made for a deadly-ass rushing duo that not only helped him and Lamar, but it actually did help Lamar too. It helped Lamar and offensive coordinator Todd Monken bring balance to said offense, because when you look at how Lamar did this past season, well, he played like an MVP again. Lamar had his best season as a passer with a variety of go-to options. He was able to throw it with more efficiency and just bring a lot of options out to the spotlight, other than Zay Flowers, other than Mark Andrews. You bring, like, Rashad Bateman finally earned his keep, finally had his best season. Yeah, it was still really injuries, but he finally had some consistency going in the receiving game. And you have a very nice season with Isaiah Likely. Sure, his role diminished a little as the season wore on, but you saw those flashes with Isaiah Likely. So you bring in a variety of weapons into the spotlight, and this Ravens offense, it got even more deadlier as throughout the season. And then when you look at a passing defense that really struggled in the first half of the season, yeah, they turned it around, though. They turned it around. So from week 9 onwards, Zach Orr's defense, they slowly figured things out, and they managed to contain their opposition to under 20 points in most games to help out the defense. So I'm not sure what the shift was, what was said after week 9, but they managed to turn it around, and they turned it around for the better. So some of the things that didn't go right for the Ravens this past year, and that one of those things was Justin Tucker. It wasn't exactly a great year for kickers in general, but Justin Tucker is one of the most reliable kickers, if not the most reliable kicker that you can have in the NFL. But he was anything but this past year. This is probably his worst season yet. He missed a lot of clutch kicks he usually make, and he was missing even makeable kicks that were 20 yards out in fine weather conditions. But yeah, Tucker was a very surprising kicker to be missing kicks. Like, I never seen that before, other than I believe 2018, where he was like missing makeable kicks. And then you have some regrettable losses that the Ravens would like to take back in the first games against the Steelers and the Browns, because they had 2 chances to take control of those games as well as the division, but they made too many mistakes in those games to win them. Like the first game in Cleveland, where it was the first one where after Deshaun Watson tore his Achilles, that they didn't have him, and it was a game that they should have won, but they overlooked the Browns and Jameis Winston. And Lamar Jackson in the Pittsburgh game, he struggled in a defensive battle that the Ravens couldn't overcome. Well, yeah, it didn't really matter in the end. Like, they could have ended the division race sooner than most people expected. Had they won one, if not both of those first division matchups against Pittsburgh and Cleveland. And then going back to Isaiah Likely, I'm not sure why they used him less often afterwards. Because Mark Andrews, don't get me wrong, he's a great tight end, but this year was a down year for him. And Todd Monken should have found a better way to utilize both of them. He should have found a way to utilize Isaiah Likely more throughout the season, because he had a great first month of the season, month and a half. I'm not sure why he was used less often afterwards. So overall, when you look at the Ravens, despite an 0-2 start and some inconsistencies on both sides of the ball, the Ravens finished strong to play some really good football and steal the AFC North away from the Steelers with a nice December run and a big downfall from the Steelers. And speaking of the Steelers, the Ravens dusted them away in a wild card 3 match. Unfortunately, when it came time for the AFC Divisional game against Josh Allen and the Bills, they dropped the ball. Literally. They literally dropped the ball when we were trying to complete a 21-10 halftime comeback. And Mark Andrews, he couldn't secure the game-tying 2-point catch at the goal line. Like, they had a chance to tie the game up, go to overtime, but unfortunately, Mark Andrews just, he couldn't secure the catch. For perspective, though, the Ravens wouldn't have been in that position had they taken care of the football in the first half, because they gave it away to the Bills 2 times in the first half, and then Mark Andrews, he fumbled it in the third quarter. But both of those turnovers in the first half were Lamar Jackson's fault. But again, he did rebound in the second half, but it's still a cause for discussion in the lead up to next fall of whether Lamar can get it done in the playoffs. But for now, though, the Ravens are currently regrouping on how they can fly over the hump and finally get back to the Super Bowl for the first time in over a decade, after 2 straight seasons of 2 missed big chances. Like, the AFC Championship game in 2023 was a major missed opportunity with that really good defense and an MVP-like year from Lamar, but he choked in the AFC title game. And then you had this past season where they also had a really good opportunity, but unfortunately, they just couldn't get the job done again in the end. So when you look at this offseason so far for the Baltimore Ravens, they started out with around $11 million in cap space. Probably went down, probably went up. And then when you look at their first round pick at 27th, very late pick. So I'm hopeful they'll get what they need at that point in time next month. So looking at some of their key free agents, not a whole lot, which is at least a good thing. At least a good thing for the Ravens. Marcus Williams at safety, receiver Nelson Aguilar, and then guard Patrick McCarry. So not a whole lot of laundry list of, we got to sign this player ASAP. Other than the one that they already did re-sign. And as we transition over to the moves that they did make, they re-signed left tackle Ronnie Stanley, who was a free agent, and they re-signed him to a big, fat, multi-year deal. So they did at least keep one of their key offensive linemen in this in this bunch. So they made at least an essential move. They also signed over receiver DeAndre Hopkins to a 1-year deal. And Hopkins is in the twilight of his career. And hopefully they'll find some usage out of him in this loaded receiving room. So some of the needs that they still need to address in this draft, this offseason in general, it's the cornerback spots. Because while they managed to turn it around, Nate Wiggins had a decent year. Marlon Humphrey, he was still good for them. The Ravens should still use their first few picks to upgrade at corner because Humphrey and Nate Wiggins, they still need some help. They still need a lot of help. And then they could also use some help in the interior offensive line because Patrick McCarry, he left for Jacksonville. So the Ravens still need to find a replacement or two to help out Lamar inside because the O-line leaked a lot there. And that led to some drive-killing sacks for the Ravens and really pissed off Lamar. And then going back to the defense, they got to add some help for Roquan Smith because they had some trouble in the short and middle of the field. And also at times the run defense, which is where former Raven Patrick Queen excelled. So the Ravens could use another linebacker or two to pair Roquan up with. So when you look at the Ravens this past year, they looked like a team that were poised to come back against Buffalo to go to the AFC Championship game against the Chiefs in a rematch, but they fell just short in the end. Had they completed their comeback, though, I felt like they had a really strong chance to prevent the Chiefs three-peating much sooner with their late season improvements. Alas, it's a moot point. While people will be questioning his ability to get it done in the playoffs in the lead up to this upcoming season, Lamar Jackson, in my opinion, is still a very reliable quarterback. He was the MVP runner-up to Josh Allen. And the thing is, though, key improvements need to be made to the offensive line and the overall defense if the Ravens want to finally get over the hump and make it back to the Super Bowl with their MVP quarterback in 2025. Now we wrap up part 5 of our 2024 NFL season team recap month by taking a trip to Motown and talk about the Detroit Lions. Year 3 of the Lions rebuild into 2023. It felt like a fever dream for a fan base that was suffering, longing for anything successful because 2023 was probably the most successful year for the Lions in a very long time because not only did they win the NFC North for the first time ever, they not only hosted 1, but 2 playoff games at home, but they won both of them. They won both of their home playoff games while notching their first ever playoff win in over 30 years and their first ever NFC title game in over 30 years. And they actually had a great opportunity at their first ever Super Bowl berth. But unfortunately, while they let that slip away in typical Lions fashion to the 49ers in that game, they went further than anybody expected. The future remained bright for these aggressive and hungry Lions. And the goal remained clear. The goal was still there for the Lions in 2024. Win it all with grit and finish your story. So to do that for the Lions, these Dan Campbell-led Lions, there are some things that had to be done at this point in time last year. So what they did at this point in time last year, if you were to the Lions gave Jared Goff this big, fat 4-year contract extension. And while it was a gamble for the Lions to do that, keep in mind, Jared Goff, he had 2 pretty good years. And coming off probably one of his best years since, I believe, 2017, 2018, when he was with the Rams. But nonetheless, Jared Goff had a pretty damn good year in 2023. Some of the other moves that they made was trading for corner Carlton Davis from the Bucks and drafting Alabama corner Terrion Arnold to help out their secondary that was pretty bad in 2023. They signed over defensive tackle DJ Reader from the Bengals and guard Kevin Seitler from the Ravens to help out the trenches on both sides of the ball. Again, while it was a big gamble for the Lions to give Goff this big fat extension, they were out to prove that 2023 was no fluke. And given their additions during that offseason, they had a very good chance to do so, despite the NFC North being pretty competitive, adding some quarterbacks that were going to be very interesting to watch all throughout the division. So when you look at this Lions team this past season, man, were they interesting to watch, to say the least. And I mean this in probably a very enjoyable way, probably a very nice way. Because when you look at that Lions team, especially on offense, they were pretty good to watch. They're very creative, very balanced. And honestly, you can't really pinpoint one specific player or thing because nearly everyone on that offense had their role. They were pretty stellar all season long. Jared Goff, he topped the previous year as one of the NFL's most accurate quarterbacks, and his pocket presence was really good this past season. He pretty much played like, I wouldn't necessarily say like an MVP because there are other quarterbacks that played well too, like Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, obviously Patrick Mahomes, but Jared Goff played great. He played pretty great last season, and I know that'll get me a lot of fire from a lot of people, but I'd say he played pretty great. And then when you look at the rest of the supporting cast, the duo of Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery at running back, they are once again an unstoppable dynamic. And then in the receiving core, Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta, they were pretty effective. And they found themselves another partner in crime in Jameson Williams, who finally hit a stride in year 2, coming off a 6-game suspension, or was it a 4-game suspension that when it got reduced? But anyway, he came off his suspension to start off his second year, and slowly but surely, he had a nice breakout year. The offense was also supported by one of the best offensive lines in the NFL in both run blocking and pass protection. Hence why they were one of the most effective in the league when it came to scoring, when it came to efficiency, all the good stuff. Because last but not least, there's offensive coordinator Ben Johnson that kept the offense from being too vanilla because they tried out a variety of trick plays. They tried out a variety of a lot of things to prevent the offense from being too predictable. There was a reason why the team raced out to 30 or more point leads before the first half ended in a good amount of their games. Even against the best teams on their schedule, they were like racing out to leads. But unfortunately, what went wrong for the Lions this past season, it was their passing defense. The passing defense, for as good as the offense was, the defense wasn't as good because there's the secondary. It was still a major flaw for this team, and it seemed like while they fixed it last offseason at this point in time, with the additions of Carlton Davis and rookie Terrion Arnold, they re-signed Emmanuel Mosley. They're still getting torched. They're still getting torched in their first 4 games to begin the year. They're still giving up a bunch of small, turn big plays, the downfield plays deep. So they're still giving up a lot of plays, and that put themselves in scoring defense mode. To add on, Terrion Arnold, sure, he had some bright moments as a rookie, but he made himself an easy target for quarterbacks and an easy target for receivers that we're gonna put Terrion Arnold into the criminal department in terms of penalties. Yeah, he was an easy target for the penalty police, whether it was defensive holding, pass interference. He was too easy to get picked on. So, in essence, the passing defense still a major problem, and it only managed to get worse because injury mania running wild in Motown. Like we talked about the Texans suffering through injury mania. I believe in our dedicated episode to the 49ers, we talked about them enduring injury mania. But the Lions, like they probably suffered injury mania, probably the worst out of all the teams that have suffered through injury mania. Because for the Detroit Lions, like they suffered a whole litany of injuries on defense. Like the filthy casual fan wouldn't bat an eye much where with a team like Detroit going through injuries before the season begins because they're just waiting for the season to start. But then as the season rolls along and the injuries start piling up, you see them on national television, then it starts to become a very glaring concern. There were just one too many season-ending injuries to key starters on defense, like the Alan McNeil, torn ACL, Malcolm Rodriguez, I think it was a pectoral tear or a bicep or another ACL. But probably the most damning injury that really sucked for Detroit is that gruesome fractured leg injury to Aiden Hutchinson in that Cowboys game that really, really affected the defense. And it could still affect the defense going into this coming season. But the more important thing was, just making sure that everyone comes away in one piece. And, keeping in perspective with this past season, the Lions already lost corners Carlton Davis and Emmanuel Mosley. But the whole defense really began to suffer because there was no pass rush. There were no impact players in the secondary that could challenge opposing receivers. So overall, despite the injuries, despite the flaws on a beaten up defense, the high octane offense made up for it. The Lions were still more impressive than the year prior. And these Lions went on to win a franchise best 15 games. They secured the NFC North again. And for the first time in franchise history, they secured the NFC's top seed in a winner-take-all season finale against the Vikings in blowout fashion. But unfortunately, despite all the season success, though, I don't know. It's hard to call this season anything of that because of how things ultimately ended in the playoffs for the Lions. And it just felt like, a common phrase among Lions detractors, Lions fans, or just a neutral fan. Lions gonna Lions. They Lions themselves in their only playoff game because when they played against the Commanders, the Cardiac Commanders, they played anything but how they played in the regular season. Jared Goff, a complete opposite of his regular season self, turned it over 5 times, three interceptions, 1 for a pick 6. The same defense got burned by Jaden Daniels in that very, very good offense. It was like a complete polar opposite of what we've seen from the Lions in all 17 games of this past season. It was a stunning upset, and Detroit cut it close, but it was pretty much too late for them. So when you look at this Lions team, they had a potential Super Bowl winning season on their hands, but unfortunately, it ended in disappointment. It really ended in disappointment, and unfortunately, all the injuries on one side of the ball, they just couldn't overcome it. They really couldn't. But as it was the previous year, there's still time. There's still times for the Lions to finally bring one home in Motown, but they got work to do. They really have some work to do on their hands. So when you look at this current season off season for the Lions, they had some money to spend. They had some money in their pocket before free agency began. They had around $52 million. That's a good amount of money. It probably went up or down depending on their spending. Looking at their first round pick, it's 28th. So pretty late in the draft. But I hope they get what they get next month. Looking at some of their key free agents, edge rusher Marcus Davenport, corner Carlton Davis, who moved on to New England, offensive lineman Dan Skipper and Kevin Zeitler. Zeitler moved on to, I believe it was Ravens? I don't remember what team he moved on to. But either way, some of the moves that they already made, unfortunately, the Lions had to make some changes in their coaching staff because gone were Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn as soon as the season ended to head coaching jobs. So Glenn is now with the Jets. Ben Johnson is still in the division, but on another team in the Bears. So they replaced both of them with John Morton at offensive coordinator and Kelvin Shepard at defensive coordinator. Morton has had prior experience at offensive coordinator with other teams around the league, but this is going to be Shepard's first time as defensive coordinator after spending the last 3 years as linebackers coach. So hopefully they'll maintain some of the goodness that Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn had, and maintain all the good like I said, all the good things that both of them had, and keep both sides of the ball relatively well. Some of the other moves that they made this past month of the offseason, they re-signed offensive lineman Dan Skipper to a 1-year deal, linebacker Derek Barnes to a 3-year deal, edge rusher Marcus Davenport to a 1-year deal. Not sure why they did that, given his injury history. And probably one of the big signs that they made to help out their secondary was signing Jets corner DJ Reed. So far, other than that, it's been a kind of quiet offseason for the Lions. So they still got a lot of work to do, because the things that they still need to address both in the draft and the rest of the offseason, they got to add some more help for DJ Reed at corner and Terrion Arnold, because their passing defense was non-existent once all the injuries started piling up. Now that Carlton Davis is in New England, they still need another corner or two to help out DJ Reed and Terrion Arnold. They also had to add some depth to the defensive line, because both key players, Alan McNeil and especially Aiden Hutchinson, are coming off very, very major injuries. So the Lions, they need to find as much help as they can at both of their spots if they're not able to recapture their pre-injury play, especially Aiden Hutchinson. So the Lions, they nearly had everything they needed to finally make a Super Bowl run this past season. And while the season ended in disappointing fashion this past year, they still have almost everything they need to make a run this coming season. The time will come, Lions fans. I know you're almost there at the promised land, and I know there's still a lot of stuff. They still suffered this past year, and they still suffered the year prior. But for the Lions to finally get to the promised land of a Lombardi, of a Super Bowl appearance in general, they not only need to add some help on defense, but next season, they really got to stay healthy at all costs. And that is a wrap on part 5 of our 2024 NFL season team recap month. And in this one, we talked about the 4 divisional playoff losers, and those teams were the Baltimore Ravens, the Houston Texans, the LA Rams, and the Detroit Lions. The last one being a very surprising one, even 2 months after. So, yeah, a lot of things that still need to be done for these 4 teams and all the teams that we previously talked about. And, yeah, the offseason has been very quiet so far, and hopefully there'll be some other big moves that will happen in the next several months. But for now, that's the end of this part of our 2024 NFL season team recap month. As in the next episode or 2, or however many, or whenever the next episode is, it'll be the end. It'll be the end of our 2024 NFL season team recap month, as we talk about the final 4 teams. Yes, it is our final 4 of NFL season team recap month. What will those final 4 teams be? Well, you'll just have to tune in and listen to find out. But until then, that is it for this episode of the Very Cold Lasagna Podcast. Episode number 259 is a wrap. I have been your host, Dylan Lasagna. Thank you for tuning into this episode. And until the next one, keep the lasagna very cold in the fridge with your takes on the world of sports. And until I see ya, when I see ya in the next episode, peace out.